for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition or indeed been to the perimeter, I really, really urge you to go. I think as for several reasons, but I think possibly principally two, which will become clearer as we speak. The first is that Anj's paintings really come alive when you see them in the flesh. I know that's what many people say about many works of art, but I think it's particularly true of your works. You get a sense of the extraordinary textural complexity of Anj's paintings, the way she uses paint to cultivate a sense of attention and awareness in us as viewers, and it's very important that you get to see those works in person. And secondly, the space in which you see them is itself incredibly special. It's and we'll hear more about it from Alex. And it's a particularly unique exhibition because it's come about as a collaboration between the artist, collector, and founder of this space, the perimeter, and I have a sense that Alex shares a sensibility with Anj, which is an incredible attention to detail and atmosphere, which you really get when you go into this space. By way of introduction, I thought we're going to let this kind of be a free-flowing conversation, but we thought we could give the exhibition some context, and for those of you who don't know the perimeter, to hear from Alex just its beginnings and how it came into being, which I understand was quite an organic process, and then to hear a bit more about the invitation to Anj for this exhibition.
Sure, thanks, Yates. So, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Alex. I founded the Perimeter in 2018, so it's been almost 5 years. And I don't know, to be totally honest, in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure really what the Perimeter was going to be or what I was even going to do there. All I knew was that, I'd been collecting art for about 8 years, and I had more art than I could have at home, than I could have in a space, and I just wanted to find a way to be able to live with some of the artworks on a daily basis and have an office where I could go and immerse myself in the art. And I found this building in Bloomsbury in the Mews, and at first, like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, so I curated a group show of some of my works, and I wasn't even really open. I was open 1 day a week for an hour, and I would give a tour on a Thursday from 11 to 12 at a really inconvenient time because I figured that if people really want to come, they'll come at an inconvenient time. So, and then those tours proved to be quite popular, and so I thought, okay, let's be a bit more, open it up a little bit more, and now we're open 5 days a week and every other Saturday. And in terms of the works that I show there, the starting point for me was always artists and works in my collection, because those are artists that I respond to, that I find myself engaging with, and I wanted to have that personal connection to the works that I show. So after the first year where I essentially showed just random selection of works from my collection, I thought, how can we make this a little bit more interesting? And I decided to do solo shows. And the first one I did was with Ron Nagel in 2019. And that just sort of led to the next one the following year, and it was very successful, and I had a lot of people coming, and I thought, okay, well, people seem to respond to this format of a solo show because you can really get a better understanding for the artist's practice, and maybe also artists that haven't really shown that much in London, or give artists an opportunity to do a show in a space that's a little bit different because it's unique, I suppose, in the sense that it's a very personal space that almost feels like an extension of my home. You know, I ask people to, you know, either take off their shoes or put on shoe covers because that's what I do at home. And I want it to feel like that kind of calm, peaceful environment, almost like an escape from the chaos of the outside world, into just have a moment of respite and just feel like your mind is just switched off from whatever else is happening.
I mean, in many, I think it's so nice to hear this because I think what's clear is that you're continually responsive to your collection and the artists that you work with, and that you build the program and the space and the exhibitions around that responsiveness. You allow it to kind of develop sort of organically. And I think, you know, which is so different from having a kind of one design and then making sure that everything fits within that, and that there is this incredible care and attention which comes primarily from the works themselves. And that's clear that this is what has happened with this very unique collaboration with Anj, who also takes a lot of care and attention in thinking about paintings and the various things that she paints. And it's clear that this particular collaboration was centered around that, encouraging us as viewers to take the time and to take a pause to kind of let ourselves be confronted with these works. So how did this sort of particular exhibition come about?
Well, I think for me at least, this exhibition is really a dream come true because I discovered Anj's work at her last show here at the gallery in 2014, I think. And I was very, very taken by it. And you know, I didn't acquire work at the time because I think I was a bit late. And so I knew that Anj didn't paint very much, so I just waited quite patiently. And it was quite a long journey before I acquired my first painting by Anj in 2016. And then I think just with Anj's work in general, it's something that you're invested in it really for the long run, because Anj doesn't make very many works, so when you do see work, well, for me at least, it was very special, and I responded to them very strongly and emotionally. And it was actually Neil who I always thought, oh, it would be amazing to do a show with Anj, but I think maybe a little bit, I don't know if I was a bit shy to ask, or I just wasn't sure because I was still starting out and I didn't know how these, you know, things sort of work and develop. And so I was, Neil knew of my very strong affinity for Anj's works, and so we had a conversation about it, and that's how things started to develop. And I had already met Anj, and you know, we had started building a friendship, and it felt like a very natural fit for the perimeter. And I was just so excited when we were able to get this show, start working on this show.
Yeah, and it was a collaborative process. So Anj, you were both having conversations about how the works would be displayed. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still haunted by something that I was told at Goldsmiths, which was that the average viewer looks at a work for under 2 seconds. And you know, some of these paintings have taken years to paint, so that has always been something that's really bothered me. So when I started speaking with Alex about possibly doing something together, you suggested that we worked with like a spatial environmental artist, Robert Story, and I knew he was amazing because he'd made the environment for that incredible kimono show at the V&A. So, and I really trusted what I remember saying to you, Alex, you can have a completely free rein, which to come out of my mouth, that is just I'm such a control freak, but I just knew instinctively that I could trust and I was curious to see, from a collector's point of view, what a personal take on my work would look like, rather than being a sterile white cube experience. I just thought that'd be fascinating. And the amazing thing about the perimeter space is that it's flawless architecturally, so the work's not fighting for the viewer's attention, but at the same time, it's a lot warmer emotionally than a gallery space. It feels quite inviting and quite emotionally sort of less intimidating, possibly, I don't know. So it was, yeah, from the very beginning, I kind of felt quite relaxed about doing this project. I felt like I was in safe hands.
Thank you. I mean, I think I was quite nervous about doing an intervention in the space because I didn't want to take anything away from your works. And when you told me, okay, you have free reign, do whatever you want, that almost made me even more nervous, because then you're like, okay, if this is hideous, then, you know, this isn't going to be great.
Smoke machines.
Yeah. But I knew, one thing that I did know was that I wanted each painting to be able to be viewed on its own and have its moment, because the paintings require attention. But then I also knew, and this is something I discussed with Anj, that we wanted people to not rush through the exhibition and to take time. And how do you do that? And so we worked with a set designer to do a very, what I feel like is quite a subtle, minimal intervention in the space in order to not take anything away from the works. Oh, there you go. So we did this sort of, I mean, I call it like I guess a desolate, deserted, sort of abandoned landscape where some of the elements have echoes of some of the landscapes in Anj's paintings. And then it also gives a sense of direction to the way you walk through the room. There's a bench here on the left. And all these little tropes, I suppose, are maybe somehow more inviting to viewers to maybe spend a little more time in the space. And I just, you know, if you have 4 paintings on the wall without anything else, yes, they're incredible paintings, but it's 4 paintings on the wall, and I wanted it to be more of an experience for the viewer, so that's how we came up with that.
We were saying that it does feel kind of offensive if you sort of rush through these rooms, which I had to do last time because I had to leave. But because you have a sense of how generous you've been, Anj, with the time that you've taken to paint these works. It's like almost like you're giving us time as viewers, and to take the time in turn to experience your works is very special. And I think the way that you've designed it does that very, very well. I mean, we're all looking at a flat screen right now. Another reason why you should go to the perimeter. But there are like little nice interventions, like SOS, this painting, which is on this wall here.
Maybe, do we have a photo of that one, Corinne? Because I think that was quite an intentional. Here, this painting here, which is SOS, which is the first painting that I acquired by Anj 2016. So this painting, we intentionally hung it from 2 sort of metal wires and anchored it into that sort of garden, because I felt like if it's hanging on the wall, then you might just look at it and walk straight out. Whereas if you very intentionally do something a little bit different with the install, and it's almost quite weird. You bring it off the wall, there's this shadow, you get up to it and you're like, oh, what have they done here? Why is this happening? And then it draws you into the painting. So that was the idea behind doing that.
I think it's really important to have a collector like you think openly about the various ways in which works from your collection and other works included in this exhibition can be shown, and to think quite creatively in that way, because there aren't many collectors who do that. I do work for 2 who do, I think, are very open to thinking about the way. I get brownie points now, but you know, they're very open to how the collection can be shown, and that's very clear that you're constantly in dialogue with the works that you have. There's one work which I thought we could start off with to kind of like do a sort of close reading of, if you like. And that's a work that's very important, I know is very important to you, Alex. when you go to the perimeter, which you now all have to do, it's in the basement. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like the exhibition has a kind of narrative in the sense of beginning, middle, and end. No. Rather, there are these kind of reiterations of ideas or motifs or compositional techniques. And this work, which is, it sort of follows a route which you end up at, but it kind of recapitulates many of the works that you have seen as you walk through the space, particularly one which we'll come and talk about, the names of the Hare. But this piece, which is called Misleading Like Lace, which is in this very intimate small room, is very important to you, Alex, and then I thought we could hear some more about it.
Can we see a close-up of that?
Yeah. So that's a detail.
But is there...
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
When I went to Anj's studio, when Anj invited me to the studio to have a chat about the works we're going to include in the show, this was the first painting that I saw when I walked in, and it happens to me very rarely. I was really, really very moved. And I think it's because there's something about Anj's portraits that are very powerful, and I didn't have one in the collection. I saw that and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. You hadn't painted portraits in a while, I think.
Yeah. Right.
So since I started collecting your work, at least, so I was really very excited to see this, and I said, Anj, we have to have this in the show because it's so incredible. And you can't really see it as it's this green background. It's almost like a poison emerald green, and yeah, I just knew that this had to be in the show, and
yeah, I mean, there's some kind of like important. When we went round earlier and and Alex pointed out the fact that it's on this kind of diagonal.
I find the composition very interesting because it's quite heavily painted. In this bottom right corner, you have these plants, you have this glass octopus. It's very, very layered and full of transparency. And then in this sort of diagonal, and then there's a lot of empty, I suppose, background. But that is really the focus of the line of the painting. But I'm sure you can probably, I don't know if that's the wrong reading or not, but something about the composition I found really striking as well.
Well, I remember you coming to the studio when I hadn't finished this painting, and I never let people see unfinished work. I mean, it's just, I need to maintain that kind of focus and that sort of, the headspace of finishing a painting can be quite difficult and treacherous, and I needed to be clear in my mind what I was doing to finish the work, because it could have gone in a few different directions right at the end. But I remember when I heard that you wanted to come, being like, yeah, that's fine. And then just never do that. But I just knew that you would be incredibly sensitive and respectful of the process. So I broke like one of my hard and fast rules about letting people come to the studio. And it was really lovely, actually. We had such a great conversation about this and about the sort of interiority of the figure, even though it's a figure and there's a lot of information about their body, and you can see every hair on the arm that's painted. You still don't have like full access. You're still somehow denied access into this figure's psychology. And yeah, it's become very much a portrait of that interior space and sort of suggestions as to what might be going on in their thought life. And then the octopus, you're quite right, like there are these two sort of locuses of activity within the painting, and there's a connection between the figure and what might be going on psychologically, and then this octopus, which is a real creature, and they really exist in this kind of translucent glass. Octopus is an incredible creature. They're invisible in the water, apart from their hearts, which is the only organ that you can see. In the head. Yeah. And they've got this way of, if they're attacked, they can swim on their side. So this became this kind of signification of extreme vulnerability or feeling like you're under threat, but finding moments of ingenuity within that in order to sort of survive. And so that octopus became very significant in relation to the figure. And also, I love the fact about the octopus that there was this huge leap forward in their cognition just at the point in evolutionary terms where they lost their shell. And I just love the fact that we often can find these personal resources and ways of overcoming difficulties and things in that moment of extreme vulnerability. And I felt like that spoke to my autobiographical content that I was bringing to this work, but also opens out more largely to address this cultural moment that we're in that feels very toxic and heavy.
And I think the fact that, Alex, that you had this very emotive response, and just now when you said that there's such a dense focus in the bottom right-hand corner, maybe if we go back to the thanks, Corinne. You know, it's not about going straight for the centre and going for the point. It's starting from an oblique perspective, which is very important to your practice in general, to think about those sidelong glances or those points of view or the points from which we might get to know the world that aren't the kind of obvious and the central. And it's interesting that you've titled this work Misleading Like Lace, which is from a poem by Marianne Moore, who wrote this poem in 1922 to 1924. I did my homework. And it's all about weaving together multiple perspectives so that's almost impossible to tell where you're standing, but many of those perspectives are very, very oblique and strange and they're not the kind of obvious statements of fact. So maybe you could say a little bit about why you drew on that poem, why it gave the title to this work, and a little bit about the importance for you of these kind of marginalised perspectives or oblique perspectives in your practice.
Yeah, I think I'm bringing a lot of myself in that, but one of the things I'm so grateful to you for, Alex, actually, is that you never presumed from the beginning that I was coming from a literal, conventional standpoint, and you never read the work like that. And that meant so much to me that you were able to articulate your response, which completely fell into line with my expectations with what I was trying to do as an artist. And yeah, definitely amplify agencies and experiences that we haven't really heard from before in art history. And the work definitely, so I sort of feel as though painting now, it's impossible to ignore the context, the historical context of painting. And I feel that as a contemporary artist, you know, it's our job to navigate that. However problematic that those histories might be, it's our job to sort of navigate that. But the work is not made as a continuation of that canon. It's very much sort of citing that language, but sort of cutting it up and splicing it and creating my own space aesthetically in terms of language, and then using that to relay my own experiences in that. So, yes, absolutely, the oblique perspective is something that feels like the only perspective that is really valid now.
I really like that because often people talk about the kind of baggage of painting.
Yes.
But actually, and novelists don't say that, like, oh, bloody hell, I've got, like hundreds of years of novels to do. But it's actually, for you, it's a great pleasure to work with this amazing variety of paintings. And as you were just saying now, you're able to reconfigure that language and play with it, weave in different perspectives or different techniques, and you're showing the kind of ongoing vitality of any kind of form of expression, whether that's with words or with music or in your case with paint. And Marianne Moore does that as well. There are however many words in the English language, but she's still able to create this incredibly vibrant poem. And yeah, so it's, as you were saying, it's not just you're not just kind of plodding along with the lineage of painting. You're deeply curious about it, and that's very clear in this.
I think there's a subversion there as well, which a straightforward read doesn't allow room to consider.
Yeah.
Which is why I really appreciated your take on the work from the beginning, because you were able to see the moments of humour and the more light-hearted moments, perhaps, but also to see that I was pulling the rug under some of that.
Yeah.
Those art historical sort of rules that we've been given, and the way that society is shaped all of those problematic tropes are embedded within art history that we've received. So yes, and if we're going to progress, we have to kind of tackle that.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, as when Alex was talking about this particular painting when we went to see it, to allow ourselves, this reaches back to what you're saying about vulnerability, to allow ourselves our thoughts and our assumptions and attitudes about people or the world or an art form to be jostled, and to let ourselves kind of, you know, not know. A lot like how you sort of set up the perimeter. You're like, well, I don't know, but I'm going to continue to learn. And to continue to learn means to continue to look closely and carefully, which your works encourage, partly just because, for so many reasons, but one, because you encourage a way of looking that isn't just about kind of reaching for one point, but looking at several different points across the kind of whole field of the painting. But there's the kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong calling this a compliment, but the painting right at the top of the perimeter is the names of the Hare.
Oh yeah, sure.
And this painting here is also, I think, about refusing what you wrote in the text, in the catalogue, about this tendency that we have of wanting to categorize and box in and fix identities. And in this painting, you're again urging the viewer to take the time to move away from the assumptions that they might bring to this work. Can you say a little bit more about this? I mean, this work is so rich, but maybe, I don't know, a little bit about the background, how it came into being, and then we can go on to the title.
Yeah, so the Hare is a really amazing phenomena. They're very wild and uncontrollable, and they're not easy to sort of really understand. And I think it's so interesting in English, you know, expressions like harebrained and mad as a March hare, these expressions, apparently they came from scientific experiments where they were studying the hare, observing the hare, but in captivity. And of course, the poor thing was going crazy, you know? So that really spoke to me about how a lot of the time as a woman, as an artist, the work has these labels sort of forced on it that don't really fit. So for example, a lot of the time, you know, people might say that the work is surreal, where possibly could be, depending on the context, but if it's reached for as an easy label, it doesn't sit very comfortably with me. You know, the surrealists didn't allow women to join them. It's not appropriate necessarily to box in the work in that kind of way. And I just think it's very interesting. Actually, Anna Maria Maolino, who's an artist that I really, really love, she spoke really eloquently about this a few years ago. She gave a talk at the Whitechapel. And I'd just given birth, but I dragged the baby. The baby and I went to hear her speak, and I'm so glad I did, because she was really articulate about how for her whole practice, her work had been wrongly contextualized in a sort of male standard, you know, in the art history that we're describing that's just full of different problems. And how actually her work was seen, I remember her giving the example of Jackson Pollock. I mean, it's absolutely got nothing whatsoever to do with her practice. Perhaps there's a superficial squiggle or something. I mean, literally, that's it. It's so thoughtless. And so I'm just thinking, to try and make a contextualization of these paintings now is kind of problematic. So yes, very much thinking about boxing in and that intention to sort of systematize and be like, right, okay, that means that. It's a sort of way of reading painting by numbers almost. It feels very reductive.
Yeah.
So there was that element to the work as well.
I mean, I like, because, you know, Alex, you were saying how you always love to return again and again to Anj's work, and they are kind of very generous and generative.
I think so. You notice so many, you know, I've looked at them a lot, and especially the ones, especially this one, Names of the Hare, and you keep on noticing things that you haven't seen before. I mean, there's some details that are just so incredible, and that's one of the things about Anj's practice, is, you know, she's just an incredibly skilled painter. Like, the level of skill, like, boggles my mind, because it's something I could never do. And so I think that's something in painting that I also really appreciate, is when you just see something that's just so incredible, because you know that it's something you could never do yourself, and that you keep on noticing things and picking things up. And you know, for me, a lot of the literary references are maybe not as don't resonate as much to me, because I'm not I don't know them or haven't studied them, but I see all sorts of meanings in the paintings that touch me personally quite deeply. And you know, it might not be what Anj intended, but for me, it's yeah.
But I think that's a really nice that you have this kind of constant astonishment in a way with the works, which you would never get if you were, just to go back to what you were saying, Anj, that you would never get if you approach these paintings as a kind of catalogue of symbols and signs, like some kind of detective, you know, go, I've got this and this, and then if I add it all up, it equals, you know, someone has done that. And you never get this aha moment where you think, I've got it, I've understood the work. Instead, you keep seeing more and more and more. It's like kind of endlessly generative. And that's, which is clear in.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Alex, because I think you understood right from the beginning, instinctively, what the heart of the work is about. And yes, there are references. I'm obsessed with books and reading and all that stuff. But in a way, those are used as a grammar to try and articulate something that you actually can't articulate, which is within the power of painting. And I sort of think, if you can really describe a painting in words, then maybe you don't need to make the painting, and maybe it's a bad painting. So I just think you've actually picked up on, you've gone straight to the heart of the matter, and in a sense, those things are secondary very much. And you and I have spoken about this painting a lot, and I really love your interpretation of it, and I feel like, initially your immediate reaction was it went straight to the heart of it. I remember discussing this with you the first time I met you in Zurich.
We saw this painting in Zurich together, and I think for me the first meaning that I read from it was this idea of this hair attached to this person, and somehow either like shedding your hair, getting a burden off your back, and becoming yourself, like becoming almost free from things that are holding you down or weighing you down. And depending on what you're going through in life, I think that's kind of something that might be applicable to everyone. But then I also saw it on the reverse as something that maybe this person is absorbing, the hair. Maybe they're becoming, or maybe they're merging with the hair and kind of becoming someone or something. So that's how I saw it, and that's why I felt quite connected to it.
I think that's because I feel that ambivalence, and in the kind of true sense of that word, of like two things being able to exist at the same time, is so crucial to your work. Yeah. It's not. It operates on this logic of kind of both and rather than either or. It's not an exclusionary way of looking at it. It's very inclusive, and that when you look at the works, it's almost like you're gathering things as you go, a little bit like, I don't know, you've got a basket and sort of things keep coming into the basket. It's not about just kind of trying to get to one specific point and then you get the summary of the work. It's actually, it allows, the kind of painting comes into being the more and more you look at it. And there is something in there about identity, that identity isn't something that is just sort of one thing, but is constantly evolving. So maybe if we
maybe there's the zoomed-in picture of the hair. We don't have one. No.
Well, you should go and see it.
Exactly. There you go. Teasing.
Because the hair actually comes off the paint.
The hair is almost coming off the paint. Is sort of coming off the.
It's really thick impasto.
It's really, really, really thick. Yeah. And it's almost coming off the canvas.
And so this question of identity is important to you in your practice, whether or not it includes a figure, but I mean particularly in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I don't know if you can see from this image, but there's a muscle vest there made out of chiffon, and there's a sort of key motif that is an Anglomania reference from Vivienne Westwood. And that was something that was always around the top of you'll be able to tell better than me, but always around the top of a drinking vessel or a vase or...
In ancient Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know, in classical
it's sort of
Greek
similar
culture.
to like a Meandros sort of motif.
Exactly.
Alex's Greek heritage, that's the...
it's always very much decorative and it's always peripheral, is the point. And then Vivienne Westwood made it centre stage, and I just love that idea of looking at agencies that have been overlooked and centering that. I think that's something that socially I think there's a huge need for, and that was just an expression of that. From what I can bring, which is autobiographical, I feel like I haven't only got an authority to speak on that, but that's what that is in the work there.
I mean, I guess also there's a rigid motif, like whether it's like carved in architecture, but then Vivienne Westwood and then you have like translated it onto this very diaphanous, Christ, I love that word, it's such a good, nice to say it, like diaphanous fabric, which, you know, it's always moving. And the textiles in your paintings are they're either frayed or they're very, very light, and you get the sense that they can constantly fold and enfold, that they're not sort of stuck in one position, which seems to be to get to the heart of what it is to be alive in the world and to learn from the world, which is to constantly be able to kind of float with it in a way, to kind of inhabit it, almost like you're kind of getting inside it, which is often how you paint textiles. That they come from clothes, they come from a history of wearing them, and I think that's very, very clear in this work. The title is from a poem.
Yes,
A Seamus Heaney translation of a Middle English poem. Why did you choose that poem, and how did it come to kind of give the title to this work?
So I listen to spoken word in the studio. I wish I could listen to music, but I just find it somehow disrupts the emotional register of painting for me. So I have to listen to the like World Service or whatever. And I heard this poem on the radio, and it was just that it was the names of the Hare, and it's this very obscure 13th century Middle English. There's like list after list of these compound nouns, very eccentric language, translated, as you say, by Seamus Heaney, who was obviously a literary genius. And it was just, I just remember crossing the studio floor and just finding myself stood still, like stock still. I thought, oh God, this is amazing. Oh God, I've done it again, sorry. It's really quite an incredible poem. And I think the reason it spoke to me was because, you know, as an artist, you're always dealing with the fact that language can never really encapsulate the concept that you're trying to articulate, and you're always wrestling with that. And for many years, my painting dealt with the fact that language always fails. And then I came to the conclusion at this moment in time in my practice, well, actually, yes, language does fail. It does always let you down. It is always porous. But the attempt at communicating is what we should treasure and value.
Yeah.
Because as language is the only tool that we've got, you know, with which to communicate. That's the only tool we've got. So even if it's a damaged and a not very satisfactory tool, we should at least, you know, prize our efforts to try and communicate with each other. And then Yates, it's interesting because since you and I have been discussing this area of linguistics, you've also taught me that the process of poetry and painting can also be quite joy-filled. It's just definitely not something that I've ever really thought about, but there's there's this, sorry, does that sound strange? It's just, you know, there's such a pleasure. There's a pleasure in the process, there's a pleasure in the potentiality of these things.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know. I pleasure probably, you know, it's also like wrought with agony and, you know, all the rest.
Well,
but
that's okay.
But I think that's very true. I mean, I love the fact that the etymology of poetry mean poiesis, that our Greek will let us know, but that it's that it means to make, and so that it written into the project of any poetic craft is this ability to create. And I think one of the reasons why I feel like poetry sits so beautifully alongside your work is that both of your both poetic practices and your work as a painter, as an artist, is about, using language not just for kind of informational ends, but actually kind of delighting in kind of moving it around, reconfiguring it, allowing it to kind of constantly generate and create new ideas or new configurations of words or images or whatever it might be. And in that sense, it feels very kind of hopeful and joyful, as opposed to this kind of sad approach would just be to kind of consume things, because there's a limit to that, because then you just think of language as this kind of finite resource rather than something that is endlessly generative, which I think you get in that poem. You know, like Seamus Heaney, the way he translates it, the rhythms of these awkward compound nouns, like they bring the hare into being because it sounds like a hare running. But then, of course, in this poem where he's trying to capture this hare with all these names, of course, he never captures the hare. But so the hare continues to live, but it continues to live because poetry is so, it can only fail at ever summarizing or capturing the world which it's trying to describe, which I think is so key to your work as well. You know, you have this precision, absolute precision, as you were saying, Alex, this incredible skill, but the point is not to kind of replace the thing, it's to draw our attention to those things, whether it's the textiles or the hair or the skin or whatever it might be.
I think sometimes representation, when you take it to such an extreme, it becomes an abstraction. And that's fascinating to me because, you know, I might paint every single pore on a skin or hair on an arm, but you're still never in any doubt that you're looking at an image. You're not looking at a window with someone standing there. So that is fascinating to me because I just think it takes you to the limits of language, and then what language can't do is fascinating. That's why I think I like poetry so much, because there's a lot said that's between the lines, and I think that is also the case in my work as well. There's a lot that's not said that's there. And then the other thing about poetry is that there's more than one reading often, and I like the freedom and the space that gives me. You know, it's like poetry and painting has always been the refuge of the misfit. So there's that as well.
Is there something in poetry, the fact that when you read poems that you're also aware of the language that the poet has used their craft, in the same way that when you look at your painting, you might be lulled into thinking, God, that's an amazing representation, and then the paint will kind of stick out and you're aware of the technique that brought that illusion in the first place. So there's this kind of back and forth, this flickering between submitting to the illusion and being aware of the mechanisms of that illusion, which seems also the case with poetry.
I think the difference between poetry and painting in contemporary culture for me is that poetry, the mechanics of poetry are interesting to me, like technique is interesting and important as well to consider, whereas I think technique in painting, it's not important. I mean, somebody else could have painted that painting, it didn't need to be me. I mean, obviously it needed to be me, but in conceptual sense, it didn't need to be me. So I don't think virtuosity or anything is important in painting anymore.
Right.
For me, it's been important to try and hone my painting ability as much as possible for one reason, and that is to be able to articulate what I want to say to the best of my ability. That's important, but not to be, technically savvy.
That's not the end point.
That's not currency that's valid anymore, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, it's also not perhaps particularly interesting. And you feel it when you look at your work. And the kind of, I mean, to go back to the green that Alex touched on in Misleading Like Lain.
It's black.
Oh, black.
Well, no, it is green.
Kind of
Sorry,
green.
It is green.
Right.
But
well, who knows what it is? That's the thing.
Technically speaking, it's black. But the thing is, it's one of those gorgeous, rich, velvety blacks that if you make layer upon layer of very sheer colour, so very diluted with turpentine and another medium that I use, then you get this amazing petrol, toxic, warm, seductive green that's just, it's just very beguiling. And then it was the perfect foil for the figure. So that was, that's amazing.
I think because this colour, this ambivalent colour, reappears in intermittence, doesn't it?
Yes. It is there.
Which...
It's mixed with some purples and lilacs, but yes, it absolutely is the same colour.
So it's this large painting in...
Do we have it?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
So that let's just say that's very big. That's 1 meter 50 by 3 meters.
Yeah.
So that's, oh, there you go.
There you go.
That makes it look smaller for some reason. That
It does, but it's actually really big.
Yeah. But I mean, here you've got this colour which is, as you were saying, very beguiling. It's very kind of alluring. And then it's also very disturbing and unsettling. If it is like a kind of oil slick, greeny black, that, I mean, well, there's a whole range of things that you think of that was like ecological collapse and, you know, oil spills and everything. So it's operating on these two registers of both kind of enchantment and disgust.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
I think comes into this work quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always sort of think when I was trying to paint the sky in this work, I was thinking about, you know, when you see a puddle and it's got something spilt in it, like a sort of, maybe I've just had too many studios in the East End, but like something that's really toxic, or petrol or oil or something spilt in it, and it's clearly very toxic and upsetting, but also really beautiful. You know, it's like a rainbow, or a sheen across the road or something spilt. So I was thinking about that when I was trying to paint the sky, but I was trying to evoke a sense of threat and animosity and sort of a thunderous electrical storm, something like that, sort of a sense of instability about the whole thing. And then I deliberately made the sky as sort of dark as I could, and then because I wanted to highlight the light source. And this is a distress flare that's been fired. It looks like it could be a sort of celebratory image, maybe a firework, but you can see at the bottom of the painting there are spent canisters. So the connotations of this image are that these gestures are being unheard. So there's a sort of sense of alienation. But at the same time, what I've been quite pleased to discover about this work is that what lingers the most in the memory after you step away from it is the flash. And I really like that, because I feel like it's a really hope-filled moment of, you know, in the midst of this uncertainty and this murkiness, there's this very effervescent kind of light-filled moment of, it feels quite sort of joy-filled and cathartic, and that sensibility has outlasted every other reading. So that's been very interesting to me. It's had these kind of twists and turns.
How did you see it, Alex, when you saw it? Did you see it as kind of mournful or hopeful, or these two things at the same time?
I think so. It's funny, I think walking people around the exhibition, they see it either one of two ways.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, I think it's very, again, it's a very personal reading. I think some people, like you said, Anj, see it as more of like a celebration, a firework, something hopeful. And then others see it as something a little bit more, how should I say? Yeah, foreboding.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I mean, you kind of shuttle between the two, don't you? Because, I mean, the ice is, there's this sort of icy sea which is covered with skulls and spent canisters, and then you've got this very ominous horizon. But as you said, set against that is this kind of, these sparkles of hope in a way, which, and I was thinking in terms of, like, thinking about paintings, how you relate to your paintings, not just to the whole kind of history of painting, but also to the present moment. One reading, of course, when we think of oil and ice and darkness is of course, the kind of ecological catastrophe that we're going through at the moment. And whether that was a sort of thread through your thinking as you were developing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always been there right from the beginning. But I think the amazing facility that painting has is that it can hold multiple conversations at the same time. And if, like Alex, you're able to cope with that idea, you know, then you can examine each of these things one by one. So the work could be about, you know, feministic concern, or it could be about the ecological situation that we find ourselves in, or about the history of painting. It could be about all of these things at the same time. And that's what painting has, this huge capacity to facilitate that. You know, we don't have to be one note. It doesn't need to be one note. It can be lots of different things at the same time.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I initially titled this painting The Eighth Bolgia, or Tier, which is a reference to Dante's Inferno, and I changed it to intermittence because I wanted to draw out this idea I'm about to speak about, so it became more abstract. But in the eighth tier of hell in Dante's Inferno, it's this murky kind of darkness. It's quite foreboding. That's a good word to use, Alex. Exactly, that kind of like very foreboding psychological space. And I was looking at Botticelli's drawings that he made, and he just used an eraser to take pigment off the vellum in order to depict these fireflies. So the only source of light in this particular area of the Inferno are these fireflies. But the thing I loved about that image was that they're self-generating, like they self-generate their light. So even though they're very dim and flickering, and it's not the best light source to have, but it's definitely better than nothing. And I just really felt like I turned the octane of that idea up a bit, because I felt Botticelli's idea was quite sort of neutral. He literally took the pigment, he took the work back to the vellum, whereas this is definitely a light source that is the main aspect and character of this work. But I just really like that idea that when we're in this very sort of toxic, heavy moment now, there's always the potential for ingenuity and creativity, and we might have to self-generate, but it is always there as a potentiality.
Yeah, and there's that flicker of hope,
yes,
which is completely what you offer. That's a really nice way to I don't want to say end, but like to kind of wrap up and then open up to the floor. So if anyone has any questions, I think we have not very long. So not some philosophical treatise, just no, thank you. Anyone have a question? Oh, here we have one.
Hi, thank you all very much. That was wonderful. I think, Anj, in your work, you spoke to all the fantastic visual references and sort of subject matter and the possibilities. Can you speak to your technical process and how you approach a painting? Because they're so detailed, there's so many layers, and just a bit about how you initiate from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, sure. So the first day of a painting is terrifying because you're just faced with white nothingness. So the very first thing I would do would be to rub a ground into the painting. It's really strange. It's like a psychological trick. So I use like a lilac or a lime green, sometimes both together, so this kind of very warm brown. And then the spell is broken, because immediately then I sort of feel like, I want to do this now, and then that leads to the next thing. It's, I never feel as though I'm searching for a subject matter or inspiration. I haven't felt that yet, ever. I feel more that I've got the idea, and it's how to navigate the expression of that. That's always where the challenge and sort of climbing the mountain comes from.
I think we have time. I'm going to look at Neil. We started a little bit. 2 more?
We're about 10 minutes over. So.
Oh, are we? Okay, we don't have time for 2.
Keep going.
Okay, let's just two brief questions. Now everyone's put on the spot. If there are any questions. Oh, here's one.
Just to kind of go on from Zoe's point, does the finished product ever feel like how you intended your initial concept, or does it have such a journey that it has a life of its own?
That's actually a really good question, and it's why I've never been able to work with assistants, because part of the thing about painting is that it's got its own autonomy. So I will have a very concrete idea of what I want to make a work about, but it always has a life of its own. So no is the straightforward answer to your question. It always ends up somewhere that I haven't expected. But I guess that's the pleasure and the joy of the process. It should always surprise you to some extent, I think.
Yeah, completely.
Anj, do you sketch an idea, or do you just start with a line? Or did you know you were going to do a squiggle?
I did know, yes, I did know, but I don't sketch actually because it's funny. I sort of feel as though either I make a drawing as an end product, or not product, as an end point in itself. So the etchings, for example, they become my drawing practice. Before I start a painting, I will always make drawings, but they're text. There's never any visual language involved because I sort of feel as though I want to start a painting with, it's almost like it's an overwhelming physical, visceral need to start making something. And that can only find expression in painting. And of course, the fantastic thing about oil painting is, of course, you can sand off and paint over the top. So there's room for, you don't have to be perfect first time, there's room for the work to evolve however it feels right.
You mentioned the Vivienne Westwood textiles. Can you tell us a little bit more about the contemporary references that you always kind of weave into the works? Coming out of an autobiographical kind of reading, of your own life.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I really love about being able to have conversations with Alex, because there are people in my life that I can talk about, Cartier with and Karl Lagerfeld. And then there are people in my life that I could talk about Vermeer and Botticelli with. With Alex, I can talk about both with equal enthusiasm and feel understood. So, that is noted and appreciated. But, within this painting, this is SOS. This was the first work that Alex acquired, and it's very meaningful for me because it's the first portrait where the figure is absent. So you sort of piece together the identity of the figure from the objects that they've curated in this landscape. And that is a very superficial reading of it. And I think there are questions that this painting asks, hopefully, which are about societal values, like how we prize different aspects of material culture and why we prize them in that way. And I was thinking about the filmmaker John Waters and how he was describing a lot of things a lot of cultural phenomena that he's embraced from the beginning has had the word trash attached to it. And, one person's trash is another person's treasure. And where do those kind of hierarchies get formed? And often, if you follow the conclusions of some of that thinking, it's quite perplexing. So I guess there's questions being asked about that in that work as well.
Yes, yeah. Rachel.
I feel like in part the paintings are about maybe the mysticism of self, and when you said that they take you a long time to make, I was just wondering about the relationship to time and making, and time and understanding and self-awareness, and how those things maybe guide the process of painting, or maybe you use them in a very instructive way to dictate how you make the painting, or if it's more that there's a pleasure in time, or a withdrawal to self, or time, I don't know, just a relationship between inside and time, and then making something. I don't know. It's not a question.
No,
it's such a fantastic question.
No, it's a really
such
good
an artist question.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic, though, because actually I think what you've highlighted there is the most important tool that an artist really has at their disposal, because I feel if you don't have that capacity, then what you make is going to be somehow hamstrung. I think that's so important that we hone that self-awareness and all of that. That's a really good question. I also feel as though, because I'm the first person in my family I come from a long line of artists, but I'm the only person that has been able to go to art school and to do this. I feel as though I really value my time as a gift to whoever might be looking at the work. So there's something very strange that happens in a painting with time. It's almost as though all of the months, in some cases years, I've spent making a work is condensed into a few seconds of someone looking at the work. And in a sense, that's the gift of the artist to the viewer. Should they be willing to spend the time and the headspace to engage with the work, then that's the invitation is this offering of these things. And I think that's one of the aspects of painting that I really treasure. When I go and see paintings that really speak to me, I sort of feel as though I'm somehow benefiting from all of the time that the artist has spent in the studio thinking about this and working out how to articulate it, and that you can experience in like a few condensed seconds.
Well, I think, yeah, being offered that time when we're told that everything is so busy that we don't have any time is a real gift. We actually have run out of time, though. So thank you. It's been such a pleasure getting to know both of you and, and have these conversations. It's been absolutely wonderful. And do go and see these works if you can. And thank you. Oh, and buy the book.
Oh, and buy the book.
Yeah. Yes.